will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The International Conference on Colonial Crimes in Africa, held under the patronage of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has kicked off at the International Conference Center here in Algiers. And speaking at the opening of the conference, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, highlighted the continent's right to demand official recognition of the crimes committed against its people during the colonial era. The 49th Conference of the European Coordination of Solidarity with the Sahrawi People, UCOCO, has wound up in the French capital Paris with the adoption of the event's final declaration. And those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. I'm Asia Bakar. Good afternoon. The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has congratulated the team of students from the National Higher School of Mathematics for winning the gold medal and securing first place at the International Mathematical Olympiad held in Moscow, Russia. President Tebboune expressed his pride in seeing Algerian students stand out among participants from 40 countries. And now the International Conference on Colonial Crimes in Africa, held under the patronage of the President of the Republic, has kicked off at the International Conference Center here in Algiers. And our colleague Masoud Sharfi, who is on the spot, tells us more in this report.
Held under the theme Justice for Africans and People of African Descent through Reparations, discussions focused on reparations, the restitution of cultural heritage, recognition of historical injustices, and addressing environmental and economic consequences, including colonial era, exploitation and nuclear testing in some regions. In the statement on behalf of the African Union Chairperson, Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, the Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the African Union Commission, Bankole Adeoye, emphasized the AU's gratitude to Algeria, highlighted reparatory justice as central to Africa's agenda, calling today's gathering a key milestone.
This historic conference takes place in Algiers is to reiterate Africa's Union's profound appreciation to the government and the people of Algeria for its unwavering contributions to Africa's liberation struggle. It is indeed a testament to the commitment that the contemporary quest for justice, for dignity of the African continent remains topmost on our agenda. The Assembly of Heads of State and Government decided that reparatory justice remains at the center of our continental agenda. The theme of the year 2025, Justice for Africans and the People of African Descent through Reparations, resonates in this particular conference. Today's gathering is therefore historic because it is a strategic milestone in implementing the decision of the Assembly of Heads of State.
The Vice Chair of the CARICOM, Caribbean Community Reparations Commission, CRC, Eric Phillips, highlighted that Africa and its diaspora are uniting to seek justice for centuries of slavery and colonialism, with CARICOM's 10-point-1 plan calling for formal acknowledgement, reparation, and support for indigenous development.
This convening is both critical and timely as Africa and her diaspora, or global Africa, are strengthening their collaboration to seek restitution, compensation, and satisfaction for the profound injustice and crimes against humanity committed for over 4 centuries in Africa and the Americas. These include over 300 years of the dehumanizing trade in enslaved Africans and chattel enslavement, followed by over 100 years of debilitating colonialism, an experience shared by global Africa, and which is the focus of our deliberation in this conference. These pernicious systems violated the fundamental human rights of Africans and demand immediate and ongoing redress. The many areas in which CARICOM has called for repair are outlined in the internationally acclaimed CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice, which calls for an apology, repatriation programs to Africa, an indigenous peoples development program, establishment of cultural institutions.
As for the chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament, Fortune Charombira, stressed creating a crime register and a catalogue through the African Union to guide reparations and compensations for historical injustices.
We repeat to motivate people to support this cause. But do we have a register of the crimes? Do we have a register of the crimes? Because that's where we should start from. We need a pyramidal approach. Each country going forward should give through the aid, of course, deposit all the injustices, the crimes, also whatever was taken to the African Union. And we come up with a catalogue. That catalog is very important. What exactly are we seeking to be compensated on? Then, of course, the AU then should help us to say 400 years of theft, of slavery, of subjugation, of crimes. How do we quantify what formula, what permutation, what calculus?
The two-day conference brings together ministers, legal experts, historians, academics and representatives from African countries, the Caribbean and diaspora communities to examine the lasting impacts of colonial rule. Organizers expect the adoption of an Algiers Declaration, which would constitute a pan-African legal and moral framework for acknowledging colonial crimes, their legacy, and endorsing reparations and restoration mechanisms. The draft declaration is scheduled to be submitted for endorsement at the next summit of African Union AU in February 2026. In hosting the conference, Algeria reaffirms its historical role in championing African dignity, memory and justice. Observers say the event could mark a turning point in the continent's approach to colonial legacy, potentially prompting new legal mechanisms, reparative initiatives and coordinated action among African states. For many participants, the conference offers an opportunity to give voice to past grievances and shape a shared future grounded in justice. From the International Conference Center, Masoud Sharfi to Radio Algeria International.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and earlier the Minister of State in charge of Foreign Affairs, the National Committee Abroad and African Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, stressed the importance of granting Africa historical justice. Speaking at the opening of the International Conference on Colonial Crimes in Africa, the Algerian Foreign Minister said Algeria, due to its bitter experience against French colonialism, fully aligns with the fundamental objectives set by the African Union for this initiative to achieve historical justice, highlighting the continent's right to demand official recognition of the crimes committed against its people during the colonial era.
Algeria fully aligns with the core objective set by the African Union for the initiative of granting historic justice to Africa. Africa has every right to ask for official and frank recognition of the crimes committed against its peoples during the colonial era. Recognition is the least we expect and wait for as a first necessary step to pave the way for dealing with the consequences of this period. The African peoples are paying a heavy price for what they have been through in terms of exclusion, marginalization, and backwardness. Thus, Africa has the right to demand a legal and international criminalization of colonialism.
He said just as the international community criminalized in the past slavery practices similar to slavery and apartheid, it is now time to criminalize colonialism itself instead of merely criminalizing some of its practices and legacies. He then spoke about the countries that are currently living under oppression and being subjected to colonialism, notably the Sahrawi people and the Palestinians, calling for granting them the right to decolonization and freedom.
يجب ألا نتغافل عن حتمية.
We must not overlook the inevitability of decolonization itself. It should be a final and complete process. Our brothers in the last colony in Africa, Western Sahara, are attached to their legitimate right to self-determination, as it was and is still affirmed by the international legality and the international community's doctrine on decolonization. As for our brothers in Palestine, in Gaza, the West Bank, and occupied Al-Quds, to all of them we reaffirm Africa's unwavering commitment, in the words of its late leader Nelson Mandela, that our freedom as Africans remains incomplete without the freedom of Palestine.
دون حرية فلسطين.
The Algerian diplomacy chief also seized the opportunity of the conference to speak about the role played by the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, in taking the initiative to organize this international conference during the last session of the African Union Summit at the beginning of this year. Now, the Secretary of State to the State and Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of African Affairs, Ms. Bakhta Salma Mansouri, has received the President of the Pan-African Parliament, Ms. Fortune Charombira, now on an official visit to Algeria. During his visit, he will take part in the International Conference on the Criminalization of Colonialism in Africa and the issue of reparations that is now being held in Algiers. The Council of the Nation has affirmed from Cairo that Algeria intends to broaden its partnerships in line with its overall economic recovery. The statement was made by the head of the Algerian parliamentary delegation participating in the summit of presidents and the forum of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Union for the Mediterranean, Mohamed Tahar Bilal. More details with Mohamed Khatel.
The summit was held under the theme Strengthening Economic Cooperation between the two shores of the Mediterranean on the 30th anniversary of the Barcelona process. Mr. Mohamed Tahar Bilal stated that the success of economic cooperation rests on fairness in the exchange of benefits, mutual respect, and reciprocity, emphasizing Algeria's profound understanding of the concept of integration and partnership on an equal footing. He said the slogan of integration has been transformed into concrete initiatives reflecting the principle of economic justice and fairness in development, principles that Algeria strives to uphold through its constant call for reform and the building of a new international order. He added that the Algerian parliament supports all initiatives that protect human and people's rights and respect the rights of states to full sovereignty over their decisions, noting that regional cooperation mechanisms cannot be fully effective if they do not prioritize the fight against colonialism, which continues to disfigure the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, and if their clauses do not refrain from perpetuating injustice and domination through the plundering of the wealth of occupied peoples within the framework of illegitimate commercial transactions.
Now, the 49th Conference of the European Coordination of Solidarity with the Sahrawi People has wound up in the French capital, Paris, with the adoption of a final declaration. The second and final day of the conference was marked by the holding of several workshops under various themes, including respect for the fundamental rights of the Sahrawi people, the responsibility of the international community, the return of Yokoko's field workshops, citizen mobilization in Europe, the example of the marches in France and Spain, and 50 years of solidarity and strategic debate prospects for solidarity, among others. Evoking the workshops, the representative of the Sahrawi Active Youth in France, Nabila Ahmed Hatem, had the following.
During this
day, the seriousness of human rights violations in the occupied territories and the critical humanitarian situation in the camps were recalled, where malnutrition, lack of water, and precarious basic services persist. The workshops emphasized the need to strengthen the political visibility of the cause, improve coordination among actors, denounce the plundering of natural resources, and grant a central role to Sahrawi youth, both in the camps and in the diaspora. Citizen mobilization in Europe continues to grow with marches, awareness-raising actions, and host programs that demonstrate the international solidarity remains firm and active. At the same time, a demonstration was also held today in Paris, where activists and members of the diaspora reaffirmed that the Sahrawi people have not been denied their right to self-determination and will never be denied it. Meanwhile, the president of the Federation of Institutions for Solidarity with Western Sahara, Carmela Ramirez, tells us more about the event.
At this
UCOCO conference that we are holding in Paris, we are renewing once again our support and solidarity with the cause of the Sahrawi people. This people has been fighting for their independence for over 50 years, subjected to Moroccan occupation. The Sahrawi people have the right to self-determination and independence, and that is why we will stand with them and their struggle until the end. At UCOCO, we are also acknowledging the support and commitment of the Algerian government, the Algerian state, and its people to this just cause of the Sahrawi people.
Con esta justa causa del pueblo saharaui.
It's worth noting that the president of the General Union of Algerian Workers, Mr. Ammar Takjout, addressed a message to participants calling on the international community, European institutions, trade unions, and human rights defenders to strengthen their mobilization for the full implementation of UN resolutions. Now, the 11th Congress of the Sahrawi Youth Union has concluded after 5 days of deliberations, highlighting the importance of considering the current circumstances surrounding the Sahrawi cause in order to empower young people to achieve the Sahrawi people's ultimate goals of freedom and independence. According to the Sahrawi press agency, the Congress presidency commended the positive atmosphere and constructive discussions that characterized the Congress sessions, reflected by the in-depth presentations and analysis of the committee's work. The Congress presidency also congratulated the newly elected leadership, urging them to work diligently and with discipline within the political organization secretariat, keeping in mind the current situation of the cause, particularly following the recent UN Security Council resolution. In his address, the president of the Sahrawi Republic and Secretary General of the Polisario Front, Brahim Ghali, stressed the importance of the youth role in strengthening the internal front through human development and the training of leaders.
The Polisario Front is ready to cooperate with the UN Secretary General and his personal envoy and to enter into serious and sincere negotiations without preconditions under the auspices of the United Nations in order to create the conditions under which the Sahrawi people can make their own sovereign decision regarding their future in full freedom and in accordance with the UN resolutions and the principles of the international law. Our people, especially the youth, have demonstrated their commitment to defending these just rights by all legitimate means and their absolute rejection of imposed solutions that circumvent the legal status of the Western Sahara conflict as a decolonization issue.
That was the statement of the Sahrawi President Brahim Ghali. Now to the Middle East, as the Israeli army pursued its bombardments of the Gaza Strip, rallies were staged, notably in Spain and Portugal, to denounce the continued Israeli attacks. In this respect, thousands of people rallied in over 40 Spanish cities, including Madrid and Barcelona, to denounce the Israeli army's action in the occupied Palestinian territories and express their support to Palestinians. The protests coincided with the celebration of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. A similar protest was also held in Lisbon, Portugal, to denounce the Israeli occupation. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and in Sudan, the army has achieved progress in the central and southern states of North Kordofan and West Kordofan following assaults launched against positions held by the rapid support paramilitary forces. The military sources were quoted by media saying that the attacks, backed by heavy artillery bombardments, had inflicted heavy losses and destroyed several vehicles. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and time now for the international event of the week.
The international event of the week.
US and Ukrainian negotiators said they had set up an updated and refined peace framework to pave the way for a settlement of the conflict in Ukraine after meeting this week in Geneva. In a joint statement, they described the discussions on a US-backed peace plan as highly productive. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio affirmed that a tremendous amount of progress was achieved, but admitted that there was still some work to be done before a final agreement could be submitted to Russia. The Geneva discussions hailed as positive by the Ukrainian negotiating team members, who stated that it was too premature to say that an agreement had been concluded. The US proposed plan reaffirms Ukraine's sovereignty and calls for wide territorial concessions and the recognition of Russian control, at least de facto, over Crimea, much of the Donbass, including Donetsk, Luhansk, and other areas still under Ukraine's control. Asked on whether the two sides would agree to territorial concessions or a swap of areas, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had the following.
The 28 plan, which was in discussion for nearly a month prior to its announcement days ago, and which started between Kushner and Witkoff and Russia's envoy Kirill Dimitrov, had its main goal to produce a framework as per Russia's representative for a lasting peace in Europe and not just Ukraine. Eventually, the Russians felt heard and supported the plan, at least privately. But the Ukrainians, who were briefed through Ukraine's envoy in a two-day meeting in Miami, Florida, and by a phone call to President Zelensky, strongly objected to the plan and how it is presented, according to their envoy. But it is President Zelensky that best summarized Ukraine's position. Making his appeal to the Ukrainian people, he depicted a Ukrainian position as trapped in between a bad deal and another bad deal. If it is accepted, it would lose its dignity, national sovereignty that is, and if it is rejected, it would lose United States support, its biggest ally. The Americans appeared later to get the message and tried to water down the plan in negotiation with the Ukrainian to 19 points, including giving security guarantees to Ukraine and increasing the total number of Ukraine soldiers to be kept in four territories from 600,000 to 800,000. But even this alteration only complicated the situation further. Russia will no longer accept it. What this all suggests is that it is too early to say how this negotiation would evolve in the future. What is guaranteed is that both the United States and Russia are negotiating for the resolution of the conflict within a European context, which has been Russia's position all the time. And with Russia not changing its position from the start, it is likely that President Trump's 28 plan would continue to be a framework of how territorial issues would be resolved. So we have to see how this will evolve.
Under the US plan, parts of Donetsk still held by Ukraine would be ceded, becoming a neutral demilitarized buffer zone, and the front lines in the southern regions would be frozen. The plan also stipulates that, regarding security, Ukraine would have to limit the number of its armed forces. It further stipulates that Ukraine must constitutionally renounce joining NATO and that NATO would agree not to have stationed troops in Ukraine. In return, Kiev would secure security agreements from the US and its allies. Asked on whether the US would manage to provide the security guarantees requested by both sides, our US-based political analyst Hamoud Salhi has this to say.
This is actually dictated by what we are witnessing today in the US foreign policy approaches to international conflict. President Donald Trump appears to have shifted the United States' focus from continuing to fully support Ukraine militarily to pursuing a ceasefire as quickly as possible. And even if this approach was against Europe's or Ukrainian interests, President Trump believes that conflict is resolved at a negotiation table and putting America's domestic prerogatives ahead of foreign policy alliances. Accordingly, he sees United States engagement in Ukraine as counterproductive. It is costly to the Americans and relieve unnecessarily Europe from its financial and resource obligations towards Europe's security. It is in this context that he has demanded Ukraine to reimburse the U.S. financially or through territorial concession. This poses a serious problem for Europe with the 28-point plan, including sensitive clauses that Europe sees as a threat to its security. For example, President Trump's plan gives guarantees to Russia that Ukraine will not be a member of NATO. Also, it puts limit to the Ukrainian troops to be stationed in 4 areas. It is in this context President Trump is approaching the Ukrainian case for U.S. geopolitical strategies, and one that seeks accommodating Russia to the extent that America's interests and costs are best served. Also, President Trump is shifting U.S. ground strategic role from leading through existing or forming new alliances to transactional direct actions for economic interests that benefit the U.S., even if it is to the detriment of its allies. To President Donald Trump, America's first shaped its foreign policy, and as such, the U.S. plan, as is now, provides security arrangements that aligns with its transactional approach to foreign policy, showing that meeting Russia's security arrangement in Europe serves America's better if Russia's security red lines are respected.
The U.S. plan promises a massive reconstruction and redevelopment package that will include rebuilding infrastructure, restoring cities destroyed by a nearly 4-year-long war, rehabilitating the energy and gas sector, investing in industry, and modernizing facilities. Finally, under the plan, a special monitoring mechanism, a peace council chaired by President Trump, would supervise the implementation of the peace agreement. Asked if the peace plan proposed by the American president would help secure a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine that has caused major human losses and damage so far, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi commented the issue.
What we have witnessed so far, President Trump is capable of moving this process forward, ending hostilities in Ukraine that have caused major human losses. But this plan as is now, and which appears to be subject to further negotiation, is still ill-equipped to deal with the core issues that led to this conflict. 3 points in particular are important to highlight. First, the plan, both in its original format, 28 points, and 19 points later, which turn into a framework, does not factor in the differences of how the parties involved see this conflict. Europe has failed to see the conflict from the Russian perspective. Its insistence on the expansion of NATO is seen by Moscow as a direct existential threat to its national security. This is further accentuated in the 19th plan, which includes a clause stipulating that a threat against Ukraine is a threat against the U.S. Russia, which has supported the 28th plan, seeing it as recognizing its perspective, will likely refuse to accept such a change, and as a result, leave the plan void. Second, Europe's approach to this conflict is rooted in a false calculation that continuance of the war will inevitably exhaust Russia's resolve and lead to its defeat.